have another exciting episode of the Scouser and the Scot.
So today we've got someone very special. I've been quite lucky to be able to say I've shared the same stage with you with one of my previous bands when we supported Taiketo.
Ah, right. Okay.
So
okay.
there you go. You like that one? We have got the legendary Chris Childs from Taiketo and Thunder. How the hell are you doing, buddy? You keeping well?
I'm keeping very. I'm sweating my my little grey hairs off here at the moment because it is absolutely roasting. I'm not going to complain, but it is. It's like kind of the hottest day of the year. But yeah, apart from that, I'm great. Keeping busy, working in my studio, missing playing like crazy, but same as everyone else, I guess.
We know that feeling all too well. And as you say, we are doing this for the love of the music industry to help people enjoy themselves. We are all, three of us are sweating our heads off completely in the hottest days of the year. So let's enjoy this one while we can. Chris, I've got 10 questions for you. Are you ready?
I am. I'm sitting. I'm actually naked, below the way from the waist down, sitting on a massive, great block of ice. I'll leave that. I'll leave that there.
But any visuals, please help yourself. And if you've got any GIFs or memes that you want to put to that, send them in. We'll enjoy them. So let's start with the questions then, Chris. I've got a visual now and I'm just like thinking that's just too much.
Luckily, I don't think in pictures, so I'm all right.
So, Chris, can you give us a bit of a background into introduction into your early music life? What kind of music did you listen to?
Well, my brother was a singer from when I was a very young lad, and obviously that was what got me into music in the first place. He was my idol, and from a very young age, that was all I ever wanted to do. And I started off playing six-string guitar when I was probably 10, I guess, 10 or 11. My mum and dad bought me an acoustic, and from my mum's club, and said, if you can learn to play this, we'll buy an electric guitar, which they did. As I learned to play it very quickly, and so I started off on six string, just put little bands together at school. I was always the lead guitarist and the lead singer, which I shudder to think what that sounded like. And when around about the age of 15, it occurred to me that there were loads and loads of guitarists in the area because I was always trying to put little bands together, but there were very few bass players. So I thought, probably time to swap to bass. So I started playing bass, and like, as they say, the rest is history.
So what music was it that you thought, I want to learn that?
What's that again?
What music dragged you in? Which bands? Name some bands. Go on.
Well, I've always been into rock. I can clearly remember the first time somebody played me Whole Lot of Love. I can clearly remember the first time somebody played me Burn. So it was always classic rock in the early days, and Jimi Hendrix, because obviously it was the mid 70s when I was beginning, or early 70s, mid 70s, when I was really beginning to get into music. So there was any amount of bands to listen to at that time, all bringing out fantastic records. I started listening to prog rock a bit later on, I guess. And then as I progressed on the bass, I started listening more to like jazz rock and fusion. I listened to Jacko and Stanley Clarke. And so I've had a massive amount of influences on my playing. It started off with people like Roger Glover and John Paul Jones. And then I got into listening to Brothers Johnson and Level 42. So I've picked up all of the fashions of bass playing as we went through the 70s, in the 80s and the 90s. I'll play with fingers or a pick, whatever works, because as I say, I've played and learnt so many different styles. I'm a bit of a chameleon in that respect.
So when you swap from
go on, John.
When you swap from six string to four string, I always assumed, obviously wrongly, that six string you would have much more, scope with it than bass. I always thought the bass would be. So obviously you never felt like that. So did you ever look back at the six string and go, I wish I'd stuck to that? Or what excited you about the bass playing? I don't understand that.
Arguably the bass is the most important part of the band. It's the engine room. It's the meat and potatoes. It's the foundation of everything in the song. If you imagine a guitarist, do either of you play at all? Okay, like imagine you're playing an A major chord on the guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you play an A on the bass, that's an A major. But if you play an F sharp on the bass, that's then an F sharp minor. So the bass is responsible for the foundation, for making the foundation of every chord of every song, and it's a driving force. It's the rhythm, the syncopation. You know, I never get tired of playing bass. I get as excited picking up a bass today as I did when I was 15. Well, I actually started playing bass when I was a bit younger than that, because I've always done recording. So, but it was around 15 or 16 that I thought, I'm going to make this my instrument.
You know what, you said something really interesting before when we were trying to jump in on a question straight off the bat. It was like, you know, you say that you play with fingers and plek, or plek, either or, which takes your fancy. What would you recommend someone who was starting off to actually go? Which direction would you advise them to start with? Fingers
I would say it largely depends on what style of music you want to play. If you're going to play exclusively rock, then a pick. I mean, I would always say learn both, because it's the same as if you're playing guitar. You know, if you learn to play fingerstyle or you learn to play with the plectrum, you're losing so much of the sound and the technique by not using either one of them. So I mean, you know, it's so useful to have both of them, to be able to call on both. And I find when I play fingerstyle, I play slightly differently rhythmically. If I'm playing fingerstyle, I'll sit back on the beat very, very slightly, which gives it a slightly more relaxed feel. I mean, just, you know, microseconds. If I'm playing with a pick, I'm sitting more on top of the beat, so it gives it more of an urgency. So, you know, it's not only the sound, it's the approach, the feel, and the style.
That's cool. I've never thought of it the way you also said it about the music theory as well. I thought that was quite an interesting one, because I've never heard a bass player tell me that in that sort of manner. As you can tell, I am a guitarist, so I am very blinkered, unfortunately. So
bass players have great power, I'm telling you, mate.
Oh, 100% they do. And do you know what?
Finding the beggars is enough.
When you find a great one, and it sinks in with your drummer, the noise and the feeling, you stand back a little bit. I enjoy standing back and letting them do their bit, because you can, as I've always said with John, less is more sometimes. And that's what I always try and tell people. If you can take things out and it still sounds as powerful, you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've listened to a whole load of 3-piece bands, and some of the stuff they come out with, the power behind it is driven by the bass and drums.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like, so.
You just look at Maiden, Iron Maiden. You know, to me, that is a band that's all. In fact, the latest single, I think, lacks hugely because the bass is so low down in the mix. I just can't. It doesn't sound like a Maiden song because the bass is so low.
No, I've not heard that yet. They've got a new album out, haven't they, as well?
Yeah, well, the new singles, it sounds to me like a southern rock song with Bruce singing in the background.
Oh, wow.
It's not bad. It's not.
Bruce's voice is good, though.
Sorry?
Bruce's voice is still good. He's still got it.
He's still got it. But as I say, it's just, I was surprised at how low down in the mix the bass seemed to be. Bear in mind that Harris's bass is what's driven it for bloody since it started. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. I think with the thing with the bass is that you know, when you said there about when you use your fingers, you kind of like you're looser as far as the time's concerned. Why is that? Is it just in a mindset, or is it why would the difference with the plectrum be?
It's I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it's just the way my technique has developed over the years. Because the one thing you don't want is to be playing ahead of the beat with a bass. You know, if like for funk and Motown and that sort of thing, or for ballads, you want to be able to sit right back on the beat, and that gives it a lazy feel. I mean, when I say back on the beat, you're not out of time with the drums. You're you know, it's literally milliseconds. If you got it up on the screen, you'd be able to see it, but it's milliseconds. And as I say, with the pick, I'm just right on top of the beat rather than being slightly behind it. And it's, I don't do it consciously. It's just the way my technique has developed. And of course, you know, feel, the way you sit on the beat, the way you sit in the pocket is everything for a bass player. That's what, it's not so much what notes you play, you know, obviously that's important, but it's how you sit with the drums. That's of paramount importance. I can't stress that enough. It's just how you sit in with the drums, and then everything else kind of slots in around you.
Can you talk us through your rig, the different rigs that you use? Obviously, I know you do a lot of home producing and stuff like that. Do you actually, is your rig different from when you go live to when you're recording? Do you use different basses when you're live to when you record? And what's the different setup on it, Chris? Well,
for the past few years, I've had an endorsement deal with Fender, and they've been absolutely brilliant. They've been so good to me. I use their Bassman heads, the Bassman 800, which are interesting. They look like the normal valve heads, but they've got a valve preamp and a Class D power amp, which means they weigh absolutely nothing. I've got so many people with this. I've said, you know, like, pick this up, and they've gone, way, because really? It's just the weight of the case, but they sound absolutely brilliant. I've got a couple of them. I use those live with an 8x10, and maybe if I need a bit more power, I'll borrow another 8x10 or Fender. But in the studio, I'll use those heads, but with a 410 cab and a 115 cab, literally because it's easier to shift them around. You know, you don't need a van to bring them down to the studio. But the cabs I use, they use neodymium drivers, which are also very, very lightweight. And of course, when you reach a certain age, you've got to look out for your back. So, you know, like the 410 cab, you can literally pick that up with one hand. They're unbelievable. So you can walk in, you know, with your whole rig in both hands. It's brilliant. They sound great. So they're the amps. I tend not to use many pedals. I did for a while use Sans amp, but there's so many tonal capabilities on the Fenders. I don't feel the need to, and you've got overdrive channels on them as well. So you know they cover all the bases, as far as I'm concerned. Guitars, I've got an endorsement deal with Sandberg. They very kindly did me a signature bass, which was called an Enigma. I use that quite a lot. I've also way back when I used to work for a company called Trace Elliott in their very early days.
Oh yeah.
When it was literally just it started off as a PA company in Romford, a little shop at 66 Victoria Street in Romford. They started off building PAs, and the owner, Fred Friedline, decided that this was it would have been late 70s, early 80s. The owner, Fred Friedline, decided he wanted to build the world's best bass amplification, because at the time all there was Sun, Ampeg, and acoustic. There wasn't really anything else. So he built the biggest, heaviest, all the components were military grade, loudest cabinets. And the funny thing is, the original Trace Elliott bass cabs were combos. So picture a combo, and as you know, a combo will have an amp at the top. Yeah. But these stood about this tall. They had the amp at the top, preamp at the top, power amp at the back, a 112 in a flared cab, a 115, and a 1x18. They were massive and incredibly heavy. And then they did another model, which is an 8x10, also a combo. These things weighed a ton, but they were brilliant. They sounded really good. And obviously Trace Elliott became one of the biggest names in bass amplification. But the funny thing was, and I just basically put these things together. A friend of mine, his wife built the amps. Somebody else built the cabs. I put the speakers in the cabinets and helped wire up the amps. But in a little room upstairs, there was this guy who was like a mad professor messing around with all this carbon graphite and molds and things. And it was Rob Green who became Stateless Bassist. And so I knew him from years and years back. And back in the 80s, I had a couple of Stateless Headless basses, which I loved, but unfortunately for one reason or another, you know, is I had to sell them. But the start of last year, I thought, right, I'm going to get one again. So I got Rob to build me a Stateless bass, which is I can't let it out of my sight. It's absolutely beautiful.
Wow, that's lovely. That.
And it is cracking. I used it for the first time on the Thunder live stream because I wasn't sure. Luke is a very traditional in terms of guitars. He loves Fenders and he loves Gibsons. He liked my Rickenbacker, and he doesn't mind me using the Fender. But anything that's slightly modern, he loathes, hates it. But I thought, what the hell, I'm going to have it anyway. So I got it, and it turns out it sounds absolutely fantastic. It kind of sounds like a Rickenbacker, and even Luke had to admit it sounded good. So I used it on the live stream. We started recording the new album. We've done one session for that, and it sounded great in the studio as well. So that will be my go-to bass. Sorry, Sandberg. That will be my go-to bass for the foreseeable future. I'm a bit fickle, really. I like to swap things around. You know, next year I'll be back to playing the Enigma again.
There's nothing wrong with that. Us musicians, there's never a rich musician, if you'd ask me. We always go out and buy it on another piece of gear that's shining at us, gleaming in a way. Got a question for you, though.
Go on.
What do you think of the new digital stuff coming out? Because you were talking about valves on the cabs and stuff like that. And obviously, when we get to a certain age, we like our lightweight stuff. Have you got an opinion on the things like your Line 6, your Kempers, and stuff like that?
Line 6 never really had it. They sound great. I mean, I use a Line 6 pod for doing demos and stuff, you know, and it's great because it's quick and it's easy and it's close enough. Live Line 6, there was something missing. It was weird. I never used it on bass, but on guitar, I always found that somebody using the Line 6 amp in a live situation, there would be a fundamental, really important frequency missing, and no matter how loud you turned it up, it was never loud enough. It kind of just went into a mush. There was something missing. Kempers, on the other hand, I find it very difficult to distinguish between the original sound and the it's not model now, it's something else, isn't it? Profiled sound.
Profiles, yeah.
Yeah, because Luke has one, and he was using one in the studio. I mean, he had a big he had the Marshall set up, so he used that a lot. But he also used the Kemper, and at one point he got the Kemper to profile the Marshall, and that's scary because I don't know if you've ever seen it done. It's like it's sucking the soul out of the amp.
Oh yeah, it does, but you can reenact everything on it, and the way technology is moving at the moment, it is taken away from the like, you know, the glory days of you carrying a massive JCM 800 on stage and, like, you know, having a wall of sound. I've got to hold my hands up and say I actually use a Line 6. I've got like a Line 6 Helix, the floorboard, and it's phenomenal. That's
kind of a step on from the Line 6 amps.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It basically it's in the same market as your Kemper.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, torn between the two, and the Kemper, I don't know, something just put me off it. I don't know what it was. I don't think it visually, to me, it just didn't look like what I wanted. But to be honest, when I'm recording demos and stuff like that, great. I can't fault it, but
the Kempers look like a toaster.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, the green toaster from Doom, but it does a lot of great stuff in there.
I tell you what, the other amp that Luke has got is called a Blug, Thomas Blug. I don't know if you come across them. So it's a German make, absolutely cracking. Not a lot of money, nowhere near as much as a Kemper, and tiny. And they have a Class D amp built in. Look into that. It's BLUG.
Yeah, that's cool.
And they
what I'll do
sound
is
great.
I'll also put a link down below to it. So guys, if
Yeah.
you're listening, I'll find it and I'll put a link down below. So check them out.
Yeah.
We're now going to kiss. Sorry, Kiss.
Yeah. Before we move on to where we're talking about gear, I've got a thing called a Backbeat. I don't know if you've come across them. You know where you can like some drummers will use the thumper on their stool for and also bass players can get a little platform you can stand on that where it basically vibrates through the stage. There's a thing called a Backbeat, and what it is, it's I haven't got it here. It's basically a little pack that goes on your strap, and if you're using in-ears, it vibrates through your back and through your strap. So if you're in an in-ear situation on a quiet stage where you haven't got an amp behind you, it kind of replaces that feeling of having a volume of an amp behind you, and it works incredibly well.
That's cool.
With the in-ears, you can, like, especially if you're on a big stage and the subs are a long way away from you, on a quiet stage where you've got no backline, you can feel very isolated, and you lose the bottom end, and weirdly it works really well. So that's also worth putting a link to. It's called Backbeat, little company in California.
I'll check them out. That sounds really cool.
That's cool. I'm glad you brought that one up. Never heard of that either, Chris. That's it. That's ace. Now we're going to move on now to the different styles of bass playing that you've obviously had to do over the years. I mean, Ian and I are old rockers, so we know you from Thunder and Taiketo. But I mean, obviously you played with Paul Young, one of my favourite bands for the 80s, then Jericho, Andy Summers, Colin Blunstone, Go West. You played with them all. Now, I would, rightly or wrongly, I would imagine that within every one of those bands and styles, you've had to vary what you do and etc. And obviously you're a student of the bass, so you know a lot of different styles. Can you talk us through this, the differences between playing with one to the other and your styles, etc.? Because I'm really interested in that element.
Well, you learn constantly, especially if you're open to it. You learn from every session you do. I'll never forget the very first session I did for Andy Summers. It was just a little studio down in Bournemouth, and he got myself and the drummer in to record some demo. He was demoing for the Police, and the very first song, we sat down, and it was quite a fast-paced song, you know, as the Police songs were. And he played me this tune, and I thought, right, I've got a fretless line will go on this, so I'm playing this fretless line. And he stopped us, and he said, no, much simpler, just play eights. So okay, and I started playing eights. Stopped me, he said, no, play it with a pick. So I said, okay, and I didn't play with the pick that much at the time. This was going way back. So okay, well, I'll play with a pick. So here I am going, doing it. He said, no, it needs to be all downstrokes. I thought, okay, he's doing this on purpose. You know, this is some kind of rite of passage. He wants me to, okay, right, all downstrokes. All through the song. Of course, by the end of the song, I've got like the claws of doom, you know. But he was absolutely right. And it's something I've after all this time, I've kind of come back to it. You know, for laziness, if you're playing eights, you play down and up as you would on a guitar, but you don't get the same timing, you don't get the same sound. If you're playing all downstrokes, they're all absolutely consistent volume and consistent timing. So it's like, you know, you learn everything. You learn something from every session you do. And that was, like I say, way back, but it's come back to me. And now I'm playing like that again. You know, I kind of slip back into the up and down thing, but now it's all downstrokes when I'm in the studio. Go West was a different thing entirely. That was, I only recorded one track with them. That became one of their singles at the time. They were having a few issues. They'd made a fantastic album, and were in the middle of recording the second one, Dancing on the Couch, spending loads and loads of money. They were out in a big studio in Denmark. I think it was Denmark, called Puck. they've been there weeks and weeks. You know, spent loads of time recording. So that myself and the drummer were with Alan Murphy, kind of rehearsing while they were finishing off the album, rehearsing for a tour. And then they decided they needed a single, so all of the rest of the album was programmed, but they wanted to put a live drummer on this one track. So we went into the studio, and unfortunately, because of the way they'd been recording, it was all very machine orientated. Everything was programmed, so it was looking at everything in the minutest detail, in the most microscopic detail. You know, every single note had to be perfect, which is how it was in the 80s. You know, that was just what it became, because everyone was obsessed with machines. So we went in, started, but funny enough, it was another song with 8s in it. They're the bane of my life. Started recording this thing, and two guys, Pete and Rick, were kind of looking at each other and say, "Oh, well, what do you think, Pete?" "Oh, I don't know. Let's try this." So we stripped it back, and in the end, I ended up playing to a click, because they wanted it sounding a certain way and sitting on the note a certain way. And it was milliseconds, but they wanted it just so, I mean, they really should have programmed it, because that was what they wanted. But, you know, again, something I learned, and there's been a massive amount of different styles that I've had to call on with the different bands. But as long as you kind of put it all in the back of your mind, stick it in your armory, then you know when that comes up, you know what's needed. You know exactly what's needed. I remember that. I remember what I had to do there. I'll do that now.
So of the bands that you've been in, Chris, is there any, obviously some you're like a hired gun, yeah, so you're a session musician, and some of the bands you're a member of where you write the songs, I'm assuming, or have a part in writing the songs. So how do you, what's the mindset? I'm guessing that the mindset when you're the hired gun, it's just do what they want, and when you're writing full songs, it's got more of your soul and spirit in it, I would guess.
Well, I don't get to write that much. I tend to put forward a lot of songs for Thunder albums. Not many get used, because I mean Luke's an incredibly prolific, talented writer. So, but I'm always submitting him just in case. And I've been writing like crazy the past couple of months. As a hired gun, yeah, you do just tend to do what's required, and that's not playing exactly what's asked of you. I always have the opportunity to put forward my style and my ideas. With Thunder especially, like when Luke writes the songs, he writes the demos, so his demos will be completely fully formed. They'll have the drum part, they'll have the bass part, all the vocal part. There'll be a complete song. Generally, I'll just play what he's played, because he's spent a long time working on, and he's a very good bass player as well. He spent a long time working on the bass line, so it sits in with the track. He's not averse to me coming up with ideas, and some of the times, it gets swapped around. But I always have the opportunity to put in my ideas. Oh, incidentally, I don't play with Taiketo anymore. I just got too busy with Thunder, and they needed someone who could do all the gigs, so they got Greg Smithing, who's a great bass player.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes across from you is, obviously, I don't think you must have I could imagine some bassists, like any other musicians, it would be the ego could get in the way, of accepting what you seem to be willing to do. Like you do actually, if you hear what he's played, you go, oh, that's ace, I'll just play that. I think that's admirable, because I think too often people's egos get in the way, and they feel they want to put their own bit in, and if that's to the detriment of the song, then it's the wrong thing to do, isn't it?
No, absolutely. That's one thing about Thunder. There are no egos. It's not allowed. If anyone gives the slightest impression that there's a bit of ego, it's It just is. I mean, there's never any arguments with Thunder. That's a great thing, but and nobody takes themselves too seriously, and nobody takes anyone else too seriously, which is why there are no egos. You know, it's just not allowed. We take the piss out of each other like mercilessly. So if anyone starts, you know, if anyone just starts, it's gone. It's stamped on straight away.
So is there anything that you've wrote which you're so proud of? Any section where you just think, I still can't believe I wrote that? You know what I mean, don't you? When you sort of listen back to things and you just go, I actually did that.
There's a couple of tracks that have never been used for anything that I wrote for Thunder albums years ago that have never really seen the light of day. I'm really actually quite pleased with them. And funny enough, a friend of mine, Keith Atack, he's just doing a solo album. I've started submitting songs for that, which will be interesting. I think that's going to be fun to do. He's got a singer called Lee Smalls who's working on that. I don't know if you come across him. He's a cracking singer.
I'll check him out. Pretty cool. So obviously you practice a lot. You play ridiculous amounts for top quality bands and stuff like that. Obviously,
not recently.
We all know that. The joys are. We can't say that on our show anymore because it's just banned. It's ruined the music industry for too long now. We all need to get out and play.
Well, by the time we get to the Christmas show, this December, it will be 2 years since Thunder played in the UK. The last show I did was on the Monsters of Rock cruise, February before last with Thunder. So 2 years.
It's crazy, isn't it? It is.
So the longest I've gone without playing since I was 16, I suppose.
So it is a good question for you. This falls in nicely. How much have you been practicing during the COVID shutdown? Have you been learning anything new? And what is your practice regime? And the reason I ask is because you see people like Joe Satch, who do scales. Mark Tremonti does all his lead bits and stuff like that as warm-ups. What is your regime? What is it you like doing on the bass as your warm-up?
Just picking it up and playing it. There isn't anything in particular. I mean, obviously, whenever anyone picks up a guitar, they always do the same little things. But I don't have a regime for practicing. It's just, I just feel like I have to pick it up, which is why I just have them sitting around. Just pick it up and play it for at least, sort of 10 minutes every day, just to make sure that it's still there in my fingers. I've been doing a lot of recording as well, so that obviously that helps. But yeah, it's just I do force myself every day just to pick it up and play just for the love of it.
And that's the best way. It is really. There's nothing better.
So who do you actually revere as a bass? So let's say there's some young people watching this, as there will be, who may have already bought a bass or are thinking about becoming a bassist, and you had to point them in the direction. Let's just stick to rock just now. We can go out of that if you want to, but rock bassists, who would you point them in the direction of and say, check him or her out, and why?
Okay, Roger Glover.
Yeah,
Roger Glover was somebody that I really liked early on. He's a great player. He's a really, really good player. John Paul Jones, different style, but I mean, what an amazing player. You listen to the stuff he was playing on the Led Zeppelin 2. It's just, it's miles ahead of its time. Paul McCartney was a great bass player. That if you want to talk about melodic lines that it's not what you play, it's what you leave out.
Yeah,
Paul was great for that. Who else? John Deacon. Again, a rock band, a three-piece rock band with a bassist playing a precision, with quite dead strings. That shouldn't work, but my God, it does. He was just fantastic. As far as I mean, unfortunately, it's all people from way back then. I'm sure there's some fantastic players out there that that I can't bring to mind at the moment. But yeah,
one of my favourites, Chris, was when I was growing up. I think he was probably the first bassist I ever noticed. Was Entwistle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now it's weird because I was never a fan of John.
Yeah.
I was never a great fan of the Who, and I was never a real fan of his playing. I just thought it was a bit messy. You know, it was a bit all over the place. But then I started learning some tunes, and I realised what he did wasn't it was incredibly well thought out. It contributed so much to the sound and the structure of the Who songs, and it's when you start learning it and realizing what it's doing for the songs, then you think, oh, hang on, you know, he really knew what he was doing. And then it was very, very strange as well, because I like back in my sort of jazz fusion days when I was trying to learn to play like Jacko and Stanley Clarke, I saw a video of John playing it was a live video of him playing a solo in 5/15, and he was doing this thing, and it was just basically noise. You know, he's playing really, really fast, and then it was noise, and I thought, oh Christ, I could do that. You know, anyone can do that. So of course I picked up my bass, and nope, nowhere near. You know, it was just a bit of a racket, but I could not make that noise. I couldn't play it like he did. And then you just think, well, actually, yeah, you know, it might sound like a racket, but I can't bloody do it.
One of me, the one which you guys have all missed out, and he's a personal favourite of mine, to be perfectly honest. It's Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith.
Yeah,
Sweet Emotion is one of the best bass lines I've actually listened to, and you just think,
well, you know, I'm going to have a listen to him now, because I was never a massive fan of Aerosmith. Couple of tunes I really like, but I would certainly never sort of zero in on the bass player. But I'll have a listen.
Have a listen, because seriously, well, when you've got Steven Tyler in the front of your band, everyone focuses on Steven Tyler, Joe Perry. It's a tough one. It's like John Deacon. Like, you know what I mean? You're not going to get past the likes of Freddie Mercury. What a legend.
That's why if you're a bassist, you should also be a lead singer like that man up there.
So, yeah. No, absolutely. You know, I missed him out. You know, he's great. He's absolutely.
He's one of the best, isn't he?
Yeah.
I know you do recordings online for bands. How hard is it to actually do these things with remote recordings with bands? What would you recommend?
Yeah, one of the most recent albums I've done online was a project with a great hero of mine, a guy called Simon Kirk on drums, and he recorded the tracks in America. Steve Morris played the guitars in his studio here, and then they sent the stuff to me to put bass on, and I was given a completely free rein for that, which was really interesting. And it took a bit of backwards and forwards, because with Simon, he doesn't play like when you're playing with Harry James from Thunder, he'll play to a click, and he'll play exactly on the click. You know, he's like a bloody metronome. But Simon pushes and pulls around the click, and you know, he lets the music breathe a bit more. So it took a bit of time to get it all sitting right between the guide guitars, the drums that he played and what I played. So it's a bit clunkier, a bit more time consuming than just sitting in the studio and playing, because that's immediate. You know, you sit down with the drummer and you play with them, you lock in. So, you know, when you're doing something remotely, it's not as rewarding, it's not as immediate, and you don't have that spark of, you know, when you're playing something and somebody does something else and you don't, you know, it's that creative spark that you're missing. I also did another album for a good friend of mine, a guy called Jeff Green, a guitarist, and he's doing a prog album. So I got to pretend I was Chris Squire for a few tracks, which I absolutely loved doing. Yeah, again, you know, we're talking about favorite bass players. Chris was the guy that made me want to buy a Rickenbacker. But of course, I finally bought a Rickenbacker, plugged it in, expecting it to sound like Chris Squire, and it really didn't. This is this is another thing that I've learned is if you're not that person, chances are you're not going to sound like them, because there's so many. You know, you can buy the same amp, you can buy the same guitar, use the same strings, use the same pickups, the same plectrum, the same cables, but if you're not that person, you're not going to sound like them. There's that's it. There's a great story that Guy Pratt, who is a fantastic player. It's a great story he tells. But he had Dave Gilmour come round to his studio to play some tracks on something he was doing, and of course Dave plugged in his Strat, and he's playing away, sounding exactly like Dave Gilmour. Dave gets up to go for a wee, and Guy thought, right, here's my chance. Picked up the Strat and played it, and of course, didn't sound like Dave anymore.
It's amazing how many people we've had on here who say the exact same thing. And this is one of the key things which I've always said when I'm helping people learn guitar. They're doing it. It's find your own tone, find your own personality will come out through your fingers. It's like, you know, you'll never be Joe Satch because he's Joe Satch. You'll never be Jimi Hendrix. You'll never be Stuart Hamm. You'll never be anyone but yourself. You can learn the styles, you can learn the techniques, but develop it so you amalgamate it and make it your own technique. And do you know what? When you stop reading these tab books and you start looking at, like, you know, how you can develop yourself, you'll move up the rank, and you'll get your own tone, your own sound.
Yeah, it's when you're doing a session or you're doing a live gig, I always say it's not what you can do, it's what you do. Yeah. It's, you know, you can have all the technique, it's not necessary. It's bringing the right thing to the table at the right time. It's knowing what to do when it's required. You know, you talk about what bass players I really look up to. Pino Palladino is probably one of my favorite bass players. I knew Pino from way back. When I moved to Wales, I kind of took over all of the work that he was doing when he moved up to London to work with Jules and Gary Newman. So I knew him quite well, and I've kind of followed him along in his career. I got the gig with Go West after Pino did it, and obviously with Paul Young as well. Pino is a really, really good example of doing the right thing. You know, obviously with the fretless, he that was just at the right time. You know, he came out with the Paul Young stuff, and that was what made him, you know, into one of the most sought after session musicians in the world. But you know, there's a lot more to Pino than just going do. You know, he's a fabulous player, and he continues to be. You know, you don't hear about him so much now, but he's working at an incredibly high level.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd like to move now on to something else that you do, and I'm going to ask this question basically because even though I work with a lot of bands, I don't quite understand the difference myself. So I'll be honest, and I'll be more honest than 90% of people watching this that will pretend to understand the difference between mixing and mastering. Now, you offer both services. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is make an idiot's guide specifically for me, what the difference is between the two, what the difference, how you approach them differently, and what the kind of skill sets you need for one. Because I've had people say, I can mix, but I can't master. So can you give us a kind of idiot's guide to the difference, please, Chris? Because that'll help me.
Okay, mixing to start off with. The most important tool in any engineer's arsenal is their ears. You know, you just need to have an open mind, listen to loads and loads of stuff, listen to how it's put together. Mixing is when you're given the individual audio tracks from a studio session or a live session. So every instrument is on its own track. Like the drums, you'll have a track of bass drum or two tracks of bass drum, one mic inside, one mic out. two tracks of snare, underneath the snare, above the snare, hi-hat, and so it goes on. So every instrument will be on a separate track, and they'll all be as they were recorded in the studio. So you then bring them up on your digital audio workstation. You then start working on making each instrument sound right. I'm still learning. Virtually every other day I'll be watching tuition videos on how the big producers work, on their workflow, on their techniques. You know, again, it's something you learn. I'm learning constantly. So you make each individual instrument sound right, and then make it sound right within the mix. And that can take a long while. If you have good, well recorded instruments, it doesn't take that long. And it's then getting the sounds right, getting them balanced, and making them work together and making it sound like a record. Now, obviously, that's simplifying it a lot, because there's a lot goes into the approach to each separate instrument. And it's knowing, in these days of working on a computer, it's all about having the right plugins, which are little pieces of software that emulate hardware. Basically, you know, going back years when you worked in the studio, you had a massive desk that had all of your equalization on. You would have banks and banks of hardware outboard equipment, which would be compressors, limiters, reverbs. This is all now on a computer, and they're represented, they're modeled as software called plugins. So you need to have loads of them. You need to know how to use them, the right way to use them. Unfortunately, I never had any training as an engineer. I'm completely self-taught. So I used to make a lot of mistakes, and I still do, like stuff that engineers, when they went to, if they learned in the studio from proper engineers, they would learn the basics of how to put things together, which I never did. You know, I kind of jumped straight in, put all the faders up and just play with it till it sounded right. So I did it the hard way. You know, if I'd learnt the basics and the techniques of mixing, it would have been a much shorter road for me. Bloody kids.
One of the questions I was asked was, one of our bands weren't happy with the mixing from the studio. So I was asking another guy in another band if he would have a listen to it. And he said to me, well, what quality are the stems? So I said, all right, okay, well, apparently they're really good. He said, well, I said, what difference does it make? He said, well, it's a bit like if you've got a photographer that takes a great photo, and then you can enhance it with Photoshop. But if you've got a crap photo, it's a lot more difficult to make it look good, even if you're brilliant with Photoshop. And he said it was the same thing with getting the stems, so the actual recordings from the studio. Is that how you see it as well, Chris?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, with drums, it's slightly easier now, and it's all about how well things were recorded in the first place. You can't, as I say, you can't polish a turd. You can't make something that's recorded that sounds like Rush. You can't mix it and make it sound like AC/DC. That isn't going to work. With drums, it's slightly easier now because you have like drum replacement software. Stephen Slate does something called Trigger. Basically, you can load up samples and it will play the samples instead of playing the original drum sounds. And they work extremely well. I use them a lot. Nearly every mix engineer works them now. With them now, sometimes exclusively, sometimes along with the actual drum sounds. But yeah, you're right. It's all about how things are recorded. If it's a bad recording, you're up against it.
Yeah. So what's the difference? Sorry.
Yeah. What a stem is basically is it's a collection of, like, you'll have say your drum kit. You have all the individual tracks, which will be the bass drum, snare drum, toms, overheads, room mics. You then mix that down into a stem, which is a stereo pair of that. So instead of having 10 channels, you'll have 2. Right. And then the same for guitars. You'll have all your guitars on the stereo pair and all your backing vocals on the stereo pair. So that's generally what a stem is known as.
Ah, that's cool. So what's the difference then between, so you're saying that basically with mixing, it's all about your ears. I would imagine it's also about your patience and your attention to detail.
Absolutely.
Because if you've no patience, I'd never be able to do it because I'd get bored too quickly with it because that's just me.
No, you have to be pretty anal and you have to be slightly OCD. You know, I spend a lot of time, like with when you're mixing tom tracks, the best way to get rid of because there's obviously a lot of noise being picked up between each tom hit, which you don't want to hear. You're hearing the rest of the drum track. So you then go in and you clear up all that noise. Best you can do it with gates, but that's how you used to do it when you were recording with tape. Obviously, because you couldn't do that. But now with digital audio workstations, you go in, you cut out all the noise. So you do it manually, and it can be quite time consuming. But I enjoy doing that. You know, that's just me. I don't mind spending loads and loads of time getting right into it and making it sound great. And I do. I probably spend a lot more time on mixes than I should do.
What about mastering then? Can you talk to me about mastering?
Mastering has, back in the days of making records, mastering was a completely different thing than what it is now. Because when you mixed the track, it was then mastered to be cut onto vinyl. It had to be a certain volume. There couldn't be a great deal of bass, because if you put too much bass on the track, the needle would literally jump out of the groove.
All right.
So mastering engineers were really quite skilled at their job. You know, it was something that not a lot of people knew how to do, because actually cutting discs is quite an involved job to do. Nowadays, obviously, very often, although vinyl has had a bit of a resurgence, mastering is more about getting as much level to compete with every other track, because it's become a thing called the loudness wars. Every track needs to be as loud as the other ones, and it's something that's come about through digital recording. You can push the level up, and of course, if you now don't record something, if you don't master something that's a bit quieter, when it comes alongside everything else on Spotify, you'll be, oh Christ, where's that gone? Yeah. So everything is now pushed up to the max level, which unfortunately you lose a lot of the transients, you lose a lot of the excitement, and you lose a lot of the dynamic in the track, because everything is trying to be really loud. So mastering is about making sure there's no bottom end right down the bottom that people don't want to hear. There's no extraneous top end. It's by basically the polish on the mixed track.
That's cool.
Again, that's simplifying it, and I'm sure mastering engineers will be coming and throwing bricks through my windows for putting it like that.
I did ask you to make it an idiot's guide, though, for my benefit. I'm taking one from the team here. I'm admitting what people will not admit, that they don't know the difference. But yeah, so
well, there's software now. Isotope do a plugin called Ozone, which basically uses AI to analyze your track and make suggestions on what plugins you should use based on its massive library of tracks. So it's something that can be, and there's online mastering solutions as well. You can upload your track to various sites, and it will master it for you and play it back to you within minutes, which is slightly scary. So it's not the dark art that it used to be. Like, as I say, back in the days of vinyl, nobody knew what they did. They kind of walked about in these white coats, did everything at night, and it was all very secretive. But it's not like that anymore.
I don't know. It sounds more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
You know what, Ian? I never thought about it, but yeah, it's right. You know, with the vinyl, right? I mean, I was brought up in the 70s. And the bass, you know, if it was too loud, it would have been jumped the needle off it. I never even gave that a thought.
There's nothing like that. I don't care what anyone says. To be honest, I know everyone's big on streaming and stuff like that, but there's nothing better than putting a record on and listening to it.
Funny thing. No, I agree. Well, you can.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
This is the first one.
Expert note.
This is the first album I've bought since I worked it out, probably the late 90s. And I got it for Tommy Taylor. And I only got it because I love him and I love his music. I don't actually have a record player. So I've got a record that I'm now going to have to buy a record player to play.
You need to.
Do you know what? There's a frightening statistic because obviously with Thunder we sell a lot of vinyl. There's a large percentage of the people that buy vinyl don't have a turntable. They buy it for the reason we used to buy it.
Put it on the
back
wall
in the day, because
there's nothing better than reading the lyrics, open it up, seeing the artwork. I love all that stuff. Yeah.
And, and then you can,
yeah, it's
what a great experience. And then you have to look after it. You have to handle it carefully.
Yeah.
And then you listen to it because you've gone to so much trouble of putting it on and being careful. You sit and you listen to it, and you listen to it in sequence, because when you're making records, you spent a lot of time sequencing the tracks to make them all sit together, to make it work, and so that when somebody's listening to it, it made sense which track came after the last one.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right, and I used to love the ones like Tommy's came with this booklet in it, and that blew me away. I read that before I listened to the music, to be perfectly honest, because it's a historical thing. It's about the Wild West, and it just took me back to, I've been 16 and going down to the local record store and getting in and listening to them with the headphones on, and then buying it and taking it home, and that's what was missing for donkey's years. But it's cool it's come back anyway.
I love it. I think it's great. It's great. We need more of it. That's what we need. So I know we touched on the Taiketo thing before, where you're not playing with them anymore and stuff like that. But we've still got 20 with 21, which hopefully all going well, that we are going to be out playing, enjoying ourselves and enjoying music, live music and stuff, like festivals and stuff like that. You're going to be playing with Thunder later on in the year. Is there any other bands that you're going to be working with on stage, playing with on stage? Where can we get to see you, Chris?
Well, I've been playing with an Eagles tribute band for years now. I quite enjoyed, because I love the Eagles, and to be honest, they're a prime example of perfectly written and put together and played and produced music. Every single part of their production is so carefully thought out, and it's a pleasure to play. And I don't tire of playing with them. And obviously people love to listen to it still. That's something I'll be doing come the new year. I think my friend Keith Atek, whose album we're working on, I think he wants to get out and play a bit. At the moment, that's kind of it. It's kind of hard to make plans, really.
Has Thunder got much planned for 22, 23 that you know of?
Yeah, loads. With the arena tour that should have happened 2 years ago, will be happening, God willing, in May. There's 5 arena shows: Wembley, Birmingham, Glasgow, Leeds, and somewhere else, Cardiff. And obviously we'll be playing the newish album there, and we're already getting some festivals in for next year as well. And then Danny's the manager, obviously. I always liken him to like an evil villain sat on his island pushing. He looks so far ahead. He's always constantly thinking of new ways to make things happen. I think there's tours booked in for 2023, but there's certainly 2022 is the arena tour.
That's
pretty epic. That is pretty epic.
So we've got a final question for you, Chris. So let's look into the dim and distant future. And you finally decided that you're no longer going to be in music or whatever. You're not playing live.
Oh, that's never.
And you look back in your life. What would success look like to you?
Well, I'm never going to stop playing. I just can't see that happening, barring serious illness, or it will have to be something that makes me stop playing because I love it so much. You know, it will only be if I'm unable to do it.
Yeah,
it won't be by choice. You know, I can never see that happening. I guess success is just still doing it, still being here and still loving what I do. Like I said, you know, I get as much of a thrill from picking up, from when I picked up my bass guitar today to start recording, as I did when I first got my first bass guitar and plugged it in. You know, I still love it. There have been certain points in my career where I just think, you know, this is really good. There was one time when I was in the studio with Simon Kirke, we were doing a track that was the album was very much a pastiche of Bad Company. The songs were written like that, and obviously Simon was playing as he was playing. And he'd put the drum track down, and he was sat in the control room with me, and we were listening back. And I said to the engineer, "Oh, just go into record a sec, because I've got this idea for the chorus. I just want to get it down while it's in my head, because you know things come and go, and I just wanted to get it down." So he pressed record. So I'm playing away. And it's basically All Right Now, like a new version of All Right Now. So I'm playing away, and Simon sat there listening, and I'm playing, and I said, "Yeah, that's you know," I said to the engineer, "That's all I need." And Simon said, "No, carry on, this is great." I just thought, I'm playing what is the closest I'm ever going to play to All Right Now with the guy that played on it. And I just, you know, it's not going to get much better than this, really.
That's cool.
So you know, there's just moments that. Little moments like that, you know.
Do you know what?
There's one other one.
I
have to relate. There's a few years ago we did stuff for a charity called Childline Rocks. We're patrons, and we did a few shows at the Indigo at the O2, where Thunder were the house band, and there were loads of other people got up, and we were like the house band for all these people. There was Lulu. I mean, it was a real sort of mishmash of people. Russ Ballard, Roger Daltrey, Marillion, Uriah Heep were on. There was Fish was on. There were loads and loads of people, and one of the people that got up was John Lord and Ian Place.
Oh wow.
And Steve Balsamo was singing, and we played Child in Time. And I stood next to John on the stage, and I played Child in Time. And again, it was I thought that there isn't going to be many moments in my career that better this, you know.
But you can walk away smiling like you are now.
Yeah. I mean, it was just. And he was the loveliest man, John Lord. You know, he was funny, and he was just great.
Yeah, that's cool.
So you know, that when I look back on my career, there'll just be those moments that I just think that was really good.
Yeah, that's cool.
So there you have it. There you got 10 questions with Chris. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as us, because it's been absolutely amazing. However, being the cheeky Scouser that I am, I always like to throw something else into the mix, because, hey, it's my show. Can you tell us, how do we find you, Chris? Where can we find your local parts? Like, so come on, give us your links. Give us your links for your website. How do we see where you're playing next? How do we, if someone wants to get in touch with you about recording, how do we get in touch and reach out to you?
Well, Facebook is an easy one. I've got the two profiles on Facebook, my normal one, and then the Chris Child's bass guitar. I've also got a website which, oh Christ, chrischilds.com or something. You know, just Google it, you'll find it.
I'll put it down below.
Oh, brilliant! Thanks, mate. Thanks. I should know all this stuff. Really,
I like throwing a curveball in. Always at the end, it catches everyone out, so don't worry about it, Chris. Like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure. I will put all the links down below. So, guys, if you are watching this, click on the links, reach out to Chris because he's an absolute legend. He's a top bloke and an amazing bass player as well. Like I say, I've been lucky to be on stage with the guy. Check them out. They are amazing. I've got one last thing to say. John, over to you, mate.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Another exciting episode of Scouser on the Scot, one I particularly enjoyed. But you know what to do until the next time. Hit that cowbell. Subscribe.